Well, hi, everybody. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy May 27th. 107th consecutive week that we've been doing our community gatherings. This is Bob Ost, Theater Resources Unlimited. Some of you may have heard this before. Some of you who are new to TRU, who have just found us. We did this on March 15th, 2020. I tore my hair out in despair. Luckily, it grew back. And I didn't know what I was going to do because we were all in something called shutdown. Shutdown? What is shutdown? None of us knew what shutdown was. Does it really mean we can't leave our apartments? And it really meant that. So we were faced with having to deal with this, a whole new world, probably one of the greatest social changes that any of us have ever gone through in our lifetimes. And after thinking about, oh my goodness, I have to close my company, I thought, well, I've heard rumors that there's something called Zoom. Actually, I didn't hear rumors at all. I had people grabbing me by the neck and saying, "Go into Zoom, do this on Zoom." And so I kind of, a couple people held my hand and told me what to do and how to do it. And so I opened up a Zoom room so that people could come in and be together and create a community in a period of isolation. So we've been doing this now for 107 weeks. A couple things that we learned during this whole shutdown that we've been through. Zoom and virtual and live streaming allows us to reach out to audiences that are way beyond our local area. So suddenly TRU is actually welcoming people from all over the country and all over the world into our weekly room. And I love that, and I'm not going to stop it. And so even though we're kind of tiptoeing out of shutdown now, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing this every Friday, community gatherings on Zoom, virtual, so people from all over the world can get together and form a community. It's a great gift. There was a lot of inconvenience, but there were also gifts that we found over the past 2 years and 2 months now, 3 months. So we've talked about various things having to do with the pandemic, and we've learned a lot about live streaming and Zoom. Things that were unfamiliar to so many of us before suddenly became part of our vocabulary by necessity. It was either that or spend time alone. So now we're reopening. Theater is resurging. Broadway is rebounding. There are a good number of shows that are more than doing well. They're doing very, very well. I mean, Music Man, it's $3 million a week in grosses, in gross revenues. And there's some that are having a harder time of it as well. But we're not through this pandemic yet. I'll tell you that firsthand because I'm on day 11 of COVID right now. And the half dozen people in the room with us right now all are going through COVID. We loosened the mask mandates, we loosened the COVID restrictions, and what happens? A lot of us get sick. So we're looking at ways to hold on to what we've learned over the past couple years with live streaming and Zoom is like tissue. It's like Kleenex. It's not Zoom. It's virtual presentations using the virtual world in creative ways, and what we keep hearing about are the possibilities of hybrid forms. We're talking now, and we have been for the past 2 years, about using live streaming as a supplement to our live performance revenues. And it's not as simple as all that. And we're going to talk a little bit about this with Gio, Jeremy, and Cody today, about just what can be done and what can't be done. I'm going to introduce you to my guests. Gio Messale from BroadwayHD, Cody Lassen, who's a commercial producer, and Jeremy Handelman, who's a commercial producer who also happens to have a video and live streaming business. So hopefully among the four of us, we'll be able to come up with some ideas about what is viable and what is not. I'm going to actually start with Gio because Broadway HD is a live streaming entity. It's all about live streaming. Gio, have you ever actually been involved in live performance as well?
Um, Before I moved to Los Angeles, I did work in theater as a stage manager. So I do have experience in the live theater world, yeah. I can't hear you.
That's because I was afraid that I was causing the feedback and I muted myself. Oops.
Oh.
Oops. Um, Tell us a little bit about about Broadway HD. I know that my friends Stuart Lane and Bonnie Comley were the ones who had this brainchild. How many years ago was that?
Um, Jesus, it's started in it was around 2015, but I always considered 2016 when we live streamed She Loves Me as when we started in the world. But it was November of 2015 is when the company was established.
Now, just for clarity's sake, I think that you're involved. Broadway HD is involved more exclusively with the live streaming version of the theater presentations. Have you ever worked in combination with live performances?
No, Broadway HD currently we just stream the live theater performances. We haven't gone into the venture of producing and live streaming our own productions.
And in spite of the fact that they that you don't do this in conjunction with any live performances, it does provide a revenue stream for producers, doesn't it? Can you talk a little bit about how it works?
Sure. There are two models that are currently out there. I think through like you mentioned, during the pandemic, a lot of things were created. There is a model where I believe Second Stage did it, where they live stream each performance out to the beautiful world out there. And where we come in is either we go in and film an actual performance and live stream that performance, or later down in the distribution model, we would take on the subscription VOD rights. But that's how we are in conjunction with them.
How does the revenue from having a piece live streamed through you, how does that relate to a production budget? Is it a separate budget? Is it part of it? Do investors participate?
It is, on our end, it is a separate budget, but we have been working with some producers that are including it part of their budget when they go out and raise the capital. So it is an ever evolving. It's ever evolving. Yeah.
That's actually very good to hear, because I was hoping there would be some purpose in this discussion when I threw it out there. So apparently, this is something that has happened as a result of shutdown. Producers are thinking more and more in terms of. Oops. There, I've muted the person that was talking. So have producers been thinking more in terms of the possibilities of live streaming and that being part of their revenue stream since COVID, or was it happening even before COVID?
I think before COVID, I think there were conversations. We were having conversations with lots of producers, and I think there are some producers that were thinking on that level. And I think that since COVID and those conversations are starting to move forward. But I think Cody can actually add on to that as.
Cody, please add on, and also Jeremy. I'm sure Jeremy. I know Jeremy was one of the first people I was aware of who was actually doing live streaming and generating product through live streaming. Am I misremembering Jeremy?
Well, in a somewhat different context. I mean, early in the lockdown, I had pivoted to live stream production, and it was really doing it on behalf of a variety of clients. Some of them were theater, some of them were other not-for-profit organizations in and out of theater. Other ones were unrelated to any of that. But, like in lieu of doing an annual gala, we would do a live stream events, partially with pre-recorded material, partially with others. And then also in fact, Nico, I think, is with us today. We did a live stream of one of her musicals. I did that for a couple of shows. So yeah, I mean, I was fairly, not as early as Broadway HD, which, as you already pointed out, predates COVID and has been around for a while now. But as far as a pivot during COVID, yeah, I was probably one of the first, one of the early ones on that move.
And Cody, what is it that you intuit Gio wanted you to add to what he was saying?
I now don't remember. I would like to say, from a producer's perspective, I would describe it as a revenue trickle and not a revenue stream. We're getting there. We're figuring it out. But no, Gio and I did Indecent together back in 2017. And ever since then, I have filmed literally every single production I've done. So I'm one of the producers who puts it in the budget, plan for it, you do it. There's been 1 or 2 shows I've filmed that have never gotten distribution for various reasons. But my MO now is just to plan on doing it and then figure out how to use it after you have it.
So it's a trickle. Okay, so what do you see as a possibility for it to becoming a more lucrative source of income? What would need to happen?
I mean, on the projects that Gio and I have worked and might work on in the future together, in the world I play in, I'm a signatory to 18 collective bargaining agreements with various unions and guilds. And I love my union brothers and sisters, but the upfront cost involved in filming a piece of theater is so prohibitive that most producers don't do it, because those are fees that you have to pay before you've sold it, before you've monetized it. You've got to have that money in the bank before you can literally even put the cameras in the house.
Can you be more specific about some of those costs so that people get a real idea?
Anyone who's a part of a labor union gets an added fee whenever cameras are in the house. So for instance, if you have a show and you want to have, B-roll film, that's all pre-negotiated in these agreements. And if you use that footage in a commercial setting, or you bring in cameras specifically for that, there's kind of pre-negotiated fees that everyone from the designers to the actor to the director to the authors that they get, that kind of triggers those fees.
Jeremy, have you worked in a different way or in the same way? What has your experience been?
Well, it's kind of different. I mean, I've been more on the facilitating side as opposed to taking a production that I'm developing and, creating a live stream element for it. That being said, I do intend to go down that road. The immersive project that I alluded to, we intend to do as both an in-person event and also a virtual event, which would involve an in-person cast and crew, but not an in-person audience for X number of performances per week, or if because of COVID, possibly, even more performances per week. So, and that would be a non-union situation, which does, as Cody points out, that would certainly make it a lot more financially viable to be able to do it that way.
Do you guys actually remember any of the agreements that were created in the past 2 years? I know there were a couple of shows that managed to come up with a model, whether it became a model that was usable afterwards or not, I'm not sure. A model through which they were able to sell tickets for a streaming version of their play that they were doing live.
I believe that either just expired or is about to expire. So that was a concession that Lort made. And we had a Broadway, Gio, what you mentioned it earlier, I forgot what show. It was a second stage show that did this.
Right. It was it's up for, I can't think of it right now.
I saw it. Clyde's.
Oh, Clyde's.
Yes. So basically what Lort allowed their member theaters to do, which includes a few Broadway theaters, is during the COVID crisis, as if it's over, but during the worst of it, as a way to kind of stop the hemorrhaging of money and still serve your audience, they allowed you, for any unsold seat to a given performance, you could sell one streaming ticket. So for instance, Clyde's on Broadway, if they had 85 unsold seats on a random Wednesday evening performance, they could only allow 85 people to buy a ticket to stream it online. Now that's not a technology limitation, obviously. You could stream it to the whole world if you wanted to, but the union kind of put that in place and said, look, we're gonna help you make up the difference in revenue of no shows and people who are not comfortable going to the theater, but you cannot go beyond the number of unsold seats in the theater.
How how did they know?
Well, I mean, we have to report our box office to the unions because so many payments are based on that. So they have a good insight into what's being sold on a given day.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, I know that they actually did quite well with Clyde's with the live stream. I think they sold most of those unsold seats.
So that's the good news. The bad news is that that contract is no longer going to be usable. Do you know if are they negotiating a variation of it? I hate to get into this whole into the union thing, but are now that we're coming back live, equity is having more say. It needs to have more say, I guess, in the contracts. Is equity at all, to the best of anyone's knowledge, looking into some sort of hybrid contract that would be usable?
The challenge with equity or the equity members is that if they are filmed in front of a camera, they have to go on a SAG-AFTRA contract, which is the television and film unions. So, so I think I would hope in time there would be some form of more conversations happening. But from where I see on the BroadwayHD side, the conversations have not changed. There's not been a merger of the two.
I'm afraid what's going to happen is what happened to the recording industry in the 90s is they ignored streaming. They didn't understand it. They had all these rigid restrictions around it. And other people figured that out. And now artists don't get paid because streaming pays, a fraction of a penny per stream. And I think we're in the last moments of us being able to figure this out on our own, or other people not in our industry are going to figure it out and they're going to monetize it and we're going to be left out. To the extent of, a big Broadway musical like SpongeBob SquarePants, it was more cost effective for them to fly the sets and the cast to the United Kingdom, film it over there, and then ship everyone back than it was to just put some cameras in the Broadway theater where it was playing 8 nights a week anyways.
So that's what they did. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good specific example. Jeremy and Cody, since you're both producers, what do you think you could propose to SAG-AFTRA or Equity that might be considered? What would you see as a possible compromise that would allow the streaming component to continue and to actually be more than a trickle?
I think what I can propose and what would be accepted are very different things. But
we could go to both places.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm negotiating a deal, I always have so much more flexibility on the back end. So I think if there could be some very small upfront fees to bring cameras in, but then a very generous split on the back end. So when these things make money, and they're going to make money, we're going to figure this out and be able to make not just a trickle, but meaningful revenue there, then we're sharing that on the back end quite generously with everyone who is involved in it. But as a producer, what's tough is to pay all those fees up front before I even know if the thing's going to make money.
Jeremy, you come to this again from from both sides of the perspective. You come to it as a producer because you've been a producer of live theater, but you also are somebody that actually creates the live stream product. Do you see any possible negotiation or compromise, or how would you like it to happen?
I mean, to be honest, I was about to say pretty much the same thing Cody just said, which is, where you get killed is on the front end. I mean, as it is, it's already a gamble with the theater production that you're going to make your money on your theater production, but of course you have to pay all those people up front in order to get the show up. Essentially to do that again in order to have it for 2 times for the same product, to have to swallow that type of upfront cost, particularly when the revenue stream, as Cody said, is still a trickle. It's just a very hard pill to swallow, and most producers I know are just not willing to go down the road that way. I'm with Cody in thinking that this is going to be figured out. This is going to end up being significant, probably more so for certain shows than for other ones. But yeah, I think it's basically comes down to getting people to accept that, hey, we're not, we, the producers and our investors, aren't going to make money on this until it's profitable to do it. So we'll share in that, profitability in some fashion with the other vested interests. But to be able to put that kind of money in up front, it's pretty much a non-starter.
Well, okay, so I think that we understand that we don't quite know what we're going to do yet. We understand that we would all love to be able to include streaming as part of our of the revenue on any commercial production. Cody, because you said you include that in your budgets now.
Yeah.
Tell us what that looks like in terms of your budgets. What percentage of the whole budget does that wind up being?
I mean, that
Math.
depends. On a small Broadway musical, that's probably $1 million to do right, Gio, what do you think?
I would say a million.
Yeah,
a million.
right,
It depends. It depends. Yeah.
Yeah, but if sky's the limit, but to do like a decent job on a fairly simple play, you're looking at about $1 million on Broadway. Off Broadway could certainly be a lot less than that, as low as maybe like $50,000.
Did you include something for streaming in your Regina Comet budget?
We did, yes.
So talk about that.
So there's a good example of the stream itself. The goal is to make that film pay for itself. So it didn't cost us anything. It's not going to deliver cold hard cash to our investors, but that will, I think, make the project more valuable in licensing. To the point that our licensing agency on that show, very specifically in our agreement, they want to see a cast album and a filmed version of it, and our terms get slightly more favorable if we do those things. Because regional theaters, if they can listen to a cast album, or they can go to their Broadway HD subscription and watch the production, as much as this might make us cringe as artists, I think oftentimes what happens is they tell their local director and design team, do that. We want that. That worked in New York. Or you can build a fan base of people who stream it and who see it, and then if it plays in their local community theater, might be more predisposed to go see it.
So let's turn to the audience point of view now, because we're limited in our conjecture about what we can do in terms of being a producer and including that. But from the audience point of view, you always hear for 2 years and 2 months, I keep hearing about Zoom fatigue. People that are resistant to we hear that people don't want to watch things on Zoom, that they want to go back to live theater. Gio, can you identify any shifts that have happened with Broadway HD audiences and subscriptions?
Sure. I mean,
Jeffrey Lyle Siegel, I'm gonna have to mute you.
Oh.
There
we go. Yeah, absolutely. I don't. We at Broadway HD, we have not seen streaming fatigue. We still have people that do want to see, that want to stream the shows on our platform. What we're hearing a lot is, oh, I streamed it on Broadway HD, and now I'm going to go see it on Broadway, or I'm going to see it on in my local theater. So it kind of falls on like what Cody was saying is there's obviously there's a revenue for there's a stream for revenue, but it also is kind of a marketing tool that lets people still go and see it live or streamed. So we have not yet seen the streaming fatigue. Obviously the pandemic brought more eyes to Broadway HD, but we have not had a shift.
Well, that's good to hear.
To me, those are two different things. For me, Zoom fatigue is, terrible production values, and that's limitations of the technology too. But also I'm generally, when I'm watching a Zoom reading, I'm doing it like I am now. You can't see this, but my computer is, 18 inches in front of my face. And I think the strain in your eyes is different than when I'm logging into Broadway HD. I don't know if I'm the only one, Gio, but I'm usually doing that on my TV, sitting on my comfortable sofa. The TV's 10 feet from me. So it's just a different viewing experience. It's not as fatiguing, I think.
Yes.
And so what
and the bigger the TV, the more in the theater you feel.
Yeah.
Of course. So Cody, from your point of view, are you saying that if you want to incorporate a streaming portion to your live production, obviously you're saying it's not really Zoom fatigue at all. Okay, so I use the word Zoom
Sure.
fatigue because it's just bandied about all the time. So it's not really a inhibiting factor for audiences because they're watching it in the comfort of their living rooms on their big screen TVs.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think if you talk to some old school producers, there's still a concern that, oh, this is going to cannibalize live ticket sales, which I say bullshit to every time, pardon the French, for two reasons. The first is, okay, great, that's your worry, film it, sit on it, and release it after the show closes on Broadway or wherever it's playing. Then you don't have that issue at all. The second is we actually have a really good data set, not from our industry, but from an adjacent industry, which is that the Met Opera saw both their subscriber base and single ticket sales increase when they started doing the live streams from the Met. So again, not quite the same as our world, but there they have cold hard data and now many years of it that they can prove that they sell more in-person tickets by doing streams. And also I think, will there be a tiny percentage of people who would have bought a ticket to see it in person who are now going to just see it on a streaming service? 100%. But my gut tells me that there's a bigger percentage of people who will see it on the streaming service and then get more interest to see it in person. Or what the biggest group will probably be are people who don't have access to New York or wherever you are and never would get there. And whether that's because they're busy or we talk about accessibility, maybe, an $18 or $12 streaming ticket is a lot more accessible to people. Still a barrier, I understand, but we talk about getting new people interested in theater. There's a lot of people not near a big theater, or even if they are, can't afford an $80 ticket, but can't afford a $10, a $12, a $19 ticket. So to me, it's an accessibility thing. It's a marketing thing. It kind of checks all the boxes. And I scream at everyone who says they don't get it or they don't think it's part of what we should be doing.
Yeah, I thought it was just proved back with Legally Blonde. I remember Legally Blonde did that, and everybody was screaming in the industry. And then Legally Blonde actually did very well on the tour because people who'd seen it on TV wanted to see it live.
Yeah, if I could
Yes.
interject on that, just to further substantiation, slight, not quite apples and apples, but not also quite apples and oranges. I worked a few decades ago in the sports television business, and there were a lot of sports leagues, baseball, basketball among them, that were always fearful of television exposure hurting the gate. So there would be local market blackouts for a lot of sports, where there'd be a national broadcast, but you couldn't show that team's game in the market because of ticket sales. And in reality, the complete opposite was true, which is that television served to market the product and boosts the value of all of those sports. And theater's a slightly different animal, but I do think the same mechanism is at play, which is that it not only does it reach people who might not otherwise be able to watch it, as Cody points out, but even for those who are capable of seeing it in person, it can serve to actually market the show. If you see something that's great online, it does whet your appetite to see it in person. And that's certainly the approach we're taking with this immersive project.
So the challenge is still really a union challenge. It's basically for the unions to come up with a way of doing this within their contracts that makes sense. And I know that I heard what you said, Cody, before. It's like it's going to cost you $1 million to record it, and you may break even on the filming of it. But it's not going to necessarily contribute to the income, the revenue, the profit actually. So, what would your recommendation be if you could make a recommendation to other people that are thinking about doing this? Boy, there's a lot of background noises. I'm just going to mute everybody. Okay.
I could give I could answer that as well.
Okay, Gio, go for it.
I think the one thing I would advise if you're looking into capture it is to definitely capitalize on it, but also film a really good capture. A capture for streaming is not just putting a camera in the back of the room. You want to think of 3 cameras, 4 cameras. You want to go in with your deals with your actors and your set designers, letting them know that you have intentions of filming, so that when it comes time to film, you might decide to just film a really good capture and hold on to it, and then clear the rights at a future time. But it's all about doing the upfront work so that when it comes time to film, it's no surprise to anyone. You know, no one's going to sit there and say, oh, I don't know if I want to do this. So it's all about getting it all done before you have your first day of rehearsal.
We have a question from Donald Loftus. He wants to know if a show starts in London, is it any easier or less expensive to film it over there?
It's
Yeah.
much less expensive to film it in London. I would say probably 2/3 less.
So the model that we can look to is a London model. Really, it's not something that seems readily viable here in New York, but London probably can do this.
Yeah, you could do it in London. You could do it at a regional level. You can even do it when it's an off-Broadway. If you feel that it's going to go to Broadway, film it off Broadway and have that capture. I always go back and tell the story. When I directed Into the Woods at my college, I went back and looked at the La Jolla production of, I think it was La Jolla, but I looked at the original production, and there is a capture of it out there, and I appreciated seeing where it started. I actually, as a student at the time, felt, wow, this is where, you know, one of my favorite musicals, this is how it started, and to compare the difference. So, you know, film it at an off-Broadway level, and it still will get your, you know, show across.
So I'm checking to see if there's other questions in the chat. Eric Rothman wants to know, to what extent are promotional videos or live streaming of a bit of the show or live interviews allowed by the unions? Do you know?
That's in all the agreements already, and it depends what agreement you're on, but there's both a minute limit that's around 5 minutes or so, and I believe you can only have one song in its entirety. And there's restrictions on, you know, it can be used on things like local news, and there's some pretty tight guardrails around that, but that's already spelled out in all the agreements.
Well, let's go back to some of the weeds we were in before, because Donald is asking, if you spend the $1 million to get it done, how likely it is that you will recoup that investment, and how is that investment recouped? You had talked about that a little bit, Jeremy. You had said that there was a model in which you were allowed to sell tickets based on how many seats that you didn't sell in your live performance. Is that the model that you were thinking about, Cody, or are you talking about two completely separate streams of revenue? The live performance and then the live streaming, which has its own life.
Yeah, I mean, the live streaming, that was really a concession that was for a very short period of time during COVID that's no longer available. So really what you're looking at is how does the actual film recoup itself? And that's why I always include it in the show budget, because if the film kind of stands alone, that's a hard thing to make work and raise money against. But if you say the film is part of this bigger thing that we're already raising a lot more money for, and they all kind of feed off of each other and support each other, then if the film only recoups to 70 or 80%, you know, I think the value you're getting in other areas more than makes up that little shortfall. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's still a gamble.
It's still a gamble.
It is a gamble, but everything is a gamble. Putting up theater is a gamble. Filming an independent film is a gamble, and filming a tentpole studio film is a gamble. So it's how much you want to gamble. It's always a risk.
And it's about working with good partners. I mean, you know, everyone wants to do this and make it a success. So even like when, you know, we did Indecent together, you know, there was a partnership there of the commercial show, of BroadwayHD, of PBS, and we all kind of said, okay, let's get in a room and figure out, like, is there a way we can make this work and make it make sense? And I think most people playing in this space right now are making up the rules, and we're all willing to kind of get in a room and say, how can we make this work? Let's talk, versus, you know, putting up a show, which by now is kind of very structured and this is the way you do it. We still have the liberty of saying, let's figure it out. Is there a better way to do it?
I think I just want to add one more thing to what Cody just said. I think the other thing is no, before you film is know what your plan is. Know what your plan is. Know what the backup plan is. So for instance, you know, Broadway HD is not the only revenue stream for capture. You know, so do your investigation, see if this is something that PBS would want, or PBS local, see if this is something that Trafalgar or Fathom would put into theaters. Because ultimately what you want to do is you want to make as much money of your investment back. And yes, if you go into profit, then that's a success. But also if you make some money back, that's a success, because this is a new world that we're going into. So definitely know, you know, what other avenues you can explore.
So
That's a good point. And we can window these things the way Hollywood has done for generations, right? I'm completely making this up and maybe this wouldn't work, but like, do you do an exclusive Fathom event for the first 2 weeks and then it goes to Broadway HD for 2 years of exclusive streaming, and then maybe years down the road, you throw it on Vimeo or Amazon Prime yourself and charge $1.99. Like,
Yeah,
you know, there's multiple ways to do this.
it's there's multiple ways. You know, it also, you have to know, like, depending what the license fee that you're getting from the distributor is, what exclusivity you can give. So it's all about a negotiation. But yeah, and you have to think, if it took you 7 years to get your show to Broadway, it's probably going to take you the same amount to make your money back on a capture, unless you sell it to Netflix or Disney Plus, and then, well, hell, we'll all be rich.
sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah, Netflix isn't exactly known for paying big bucks for the theater stuff these days, but maybe that will change.
Good or bad to know, but all right.
Yeah, but I mean, it is analogous though to the, you know, to the indie film industry. I mean, most of those films have to raise their money without knowing what their final distribution is going to be, even though they're going to be hustling to get, you know, 5, 10, 15 different distribution outlets. It's, you know, it's part of the gamble, but it's also part of what you have to do.
So I'm going to start going through the 23 messages that are in the chat. Elizabeth Copeland starts, she says, I go to New York City frequently, but not often enough to see every show I'd like to see, and think streaming is a wonderful product. And Patricia Porta builds on that and says, it has absolutely made it more accessible and inclusive. It reaches a much larger audience. So the question to you as producers is this music to your ears, or is this like, oh no, my audience is going to wait and see things live streaming and they're not going to come to the theater?
You know, I don't think the data or my gut reaction bears any fruit in that thinking.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I want to add, I forgot to add this earlier. With all the data that's out there, we've always used that with our pitch, but we did our own thing with Holiday Inn, where we test screened it in DC, in one of the big Broadway touring houses. And the data that we got back is that 70%, I think it was 75% would still go see it. And the rest would maybe go see it, but nobody really said that they wouldn't go see it. So it, you know, the data is there. I think streaming will never replace live theater, and they're just two different worlds.
No, I want to watch Beyonce's music videos, but I want to go see her in person too. It's not the same experience.
okay.
Yeah.
So question for Cody from Eric Rothman. And actually to all of you, would you consider filming all or part of a show in immersive 3D XR instead of, or in addition to, standard 2D? Broadway HD, that's a tough one for you, because how does anybody experience Broadway HD in 3D?
It's tough because of the revenue that would come in, because not everyone's going to have a 3D TV or 3D glasses. It's the same thing. We explored virtual VR at one point, which could be quite expensive, but it's just the technology. Not everyone has the technology to do that. So I would try to suggest to stay in the 2D world.
And I think what Eric's hoping is that the 3D world is going to expand eventually and become more affordable. It is a little bit pricey for people.
Right, but then it also has to be what show, right? If, like, Lion King would be great, even Spider-Man, when it was, that would be a great in 3D, you know, to experience. But, you know, Into the Woods in 3D, or, you know, 6 in 3D, I don't think that wouldn't be as effective. So it'd have to be something that has a lot of sequences so that it really impacts the viewing.
Nico Juber says at some point about 8 minutes ago, Gio, you bring up a good point. Is having a premium developmental capture, even pre-off-Broadway, a good idea too? I know we're all usually cautious about what materials we put out publicly during development. So that's a complicated question because it involves unions again.
Yeah, it's complicated. Again, I think the best advice is know how much are you willing to take a risk in, you know, because it is complicated. You know, with the unions, you know, off Broadway, the unions are not as heavy and the fees are not as high. Again, what makes Broadway challenging is that you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollar fees going out. So, I think it has to be where you're willing to take a risk, because when you start getting into the subscription world, or even if you're going to like a PBS, or it has to be like, is it a brand that you're putting forward? There has to be a long haul. So just, you know, be careful. But yeah, I mean, and also, this is the other component that as producers you should think about is, does the author want that version of the project out there?
Always good to check in with the author.
Yeah, because ultimately you're dealing with people's underlying rights and creative rights. So you need to get everyone on board. I think, Cody, that's the other thing that makes it challenging to film, is you need to have everyone's permission to film it.
John Ross Sorkin is asking for other platforms that, besides BroadwayHD, to reach a broad international audience. You actually mentioned a couple before, so some of this may have been answered. But can you mention any others?
Oh, it should just be BroadwayHD.
I know.
Don't ask me that question. There are others out. There are others out there. Definitely. You know, but BroadwayHD is where you should be.
Well, for different kinds of products though. There's streaming musicals, which is Tom Pullum's company.
There's a handful out there, and there's also self-distributing it. You know, that it's not rocket science. You're gonna have to do all the work, and you're gonna have to put the marketing dollars out there to get the word out. But like, even if you don't get a distribution deal with someone, you can put it up on a website or put it up on a Vimeo or a YouTube and try to monetize it.
Isn't there also Broadway Direct and Broadway Virtual?
No, there's marquee television that focuses in on arts, like ballets and performance arts, opera, and there's All Arts, which is the PBS streaming platform, and there's a whole bunch of others that I'm not going to say.
That's okay. Okay. Myra's asking about a 3D theatrical production in a post-lockdown world, and I'm not sure whether we're experts enough in 3D to talk about that. VR. Virtual. That would be a question for Eric Rothman.
Yeah, send him a DM. I bet he can answer right away.
He'll answer it. Michelle Reese wants to know if you could talk briefly about Hamilton on Disney Plus. How did that logistically happen?
I mean, I think that's such an outlier in the sense that Hamilton, the musical, is such an outlier that there's nothing to be learned there, and there's nothing that will ever be replicated there. That stands alone. And that was supposed to be a theatrical release, and then COVID happened, so that was never intended to be a streaming product. But there's actually a very good example though of how that was planned very early on. They filmed it, they sat on it for literally years, and then released it. Somebody early on, Jeffrey or someone on his team said, let's do this, and then we'll figure out how to make it work later.
Yeah. And it's still streaming on Disney Plus, and it's still having a successful run on Broadway.
Yeah.
So
Tracy
come,
Swedlow
someone
was
just said,
asking.
come from away.
There's so many questions,
Oh
guys.
my God.
Tracy Swedlow was asking whether live streaming, since it's such a different type of offering, does it have a different audience, and how do you reach that audience?
That's a good question. I think the audience is niche, but where we're reaching is, to areas of the world that, like Cody said earlier, that will never come to Broadway. When we live streamed She Loves Me, we got emails from people in Nigeria saying, "Oh my God, I just watched She Loves Me. I will never come to New York, and this is as close as I can get to watching theater, and thank you so much." So it's it is a niche audience. We're trying to break that barrier to go beyond the niche audience. But yes, there's definitely an audience out there. There are a lot of people that just, I know people, I think in the past year, I think maybe it's because it's coming back from the pandemic. The more and more people I speak in the street have said, "Oh yeah, I subscribe to Broadway HD," and that's that's amazing. So yeah, there is an audience.
Jeremy, George Furman, the theater we're using comes with 3 cameras, but we need to hire someone to produce the live streaming. Is this something any of you do? The only one that would do that, I think, is you, Jeremy. Non-equity production.
Yeah, we've been, I've been doing a bunch of those.
So there are people that do that, George. You just have to find them. So Jeremy would be a good resource for you. Gregory.
I want to add something to that also, is if you are going to film your show, invest in bringing in a TV lighting director to adjust the lighting for camera. Nothing worse than blown out faces. And also bring a film or TV audio person in to work with your audio department so that you get the best audio as possible. Sometimes double miking so that you have a safety. So those are the little tidbits that I can give for anyone so that you can bring in a higher quality.
Gregory asks, would it be appropriate to treat streaming revenue similar to DVD sales? During their peak, they were almost treated like a film's second life if it didn't do well in theaters. It's an expensive route to take, I think. But Cody, what do you think?
I think someday this will be a meaningful revenue source for shows. We're not there yet, but that's why we're on this call trying to figure it out. I don't think it will ever be at, to your point, at its height, DVDs could often outsell the theatrical window. I don't know that we'll ever get there, but who knows?
Larry Daggett wants to make sure he heard you correctly. To film a show on Broadway costs about $1 million. For off-Broadway, about $50,000. But those are for commercial viewing. What about filming a show for the purpose of showing it to potential investors only, not for commercial use?
Yeah, those are kind of the entry prices. I bet Hamilton was millions of dollars, right? I bet that was a multi-million-dollar filming. But those are also to film it for archival use, to share with potential theaters or potential investors. That's addressed in all the agreements as well. Hasn't really kept up with the times. I believe the agreements still say somebody has to physically come to your office and watch it in front of you. You can't send them a link. You can't send them a DVD. I could be wrong and they might have been updated, but I believe technically you have to have people watch it in front of you.
Jeffrey Lyle Siegel suggests that people look into the SAG-AFTRA new media agreements for filming your shows.
That's a good point. What we're talking about right now are existing live stage productions and filming those. If you have a show that you just want to do on a sound stage and still stage it as if it's a live musical, but just record it, that becomes so much easier. Because now you're just doing a SAG new media or ultra low budget agreement. You check a box, you fill out a form, you email it, and as long as you pay people, you're approved.
Right. I think that's also, you could also do it, rent a non-union theater, and as long as you don't have a inviting paid audience, you can treat it as a under SAG-AFTRA. But once there's an invited paid audience, then unless you're going with non-union actors, then it would have to fall on both equity and SAG. But yeah, if you have something, get a warehouse. And we got from the UK during the pandemic, wonderful productions done during quarantine where they went and rented a rehearsal room. Our title of show was done in a rehearsal room in the UK, and we have Brooklyn that was done in a warehouse. They went and rented a warehouse and brought in cameras, brought a great set designer. So there are ways around it.
And if you're curious, call a smart general manager who's done a couple of these. They can pretty quickly give you a gut feeling for what these different versions would cost and what restrictions would or wouldn't fall under. And it's getting to the point now that I think every GM agreement I've done since COVID started, GMs now have a fee specifically for this. Oh, you're going to capture and potentially stream. Like, we have a set fee, and we're going to handle all the agreements. We're going to work on the logistics side of that for you.
Paul Smith, which types of events are viewed more virtually rather than live? That would be an interesting question for you, Gio. Phrasing it a different way, what are the most popular things that you present on BroadwayHD?
Sure. Brand. High brand is what's popular. Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera, She Loves Me, falsettos, all the big names, revivals, anything that people have seen either in their community theater or on tour in a regional production are the ones that are popular. But then also what tends to be popular too are those little gems that, you know, no one's heard of, you know. So we got into a rhythm at BroadwayHD where we try to release something once a week. And so people are watching what we release each week.
Okay, so
but the brands do, you know, the brands bring a lot of viewership.
Let's see what else we have here. The author issue is a great point. This is Jeffrey Lyle Siegel. I just ran into a wall trying to develop a project through streaming because of the opposition of the underlying rights holder. So, yeah, we're just acknowledging that can be an issue. Eric Rothman keeps telling us there are now 5 million 3D VR viewers and growing fast, which is Eric. I think we all acknowledge that this is going to be major and big eventually, but right now it's not as it's limited because of the costs to the consumer of being able to participate in virtual reality.
But how many of those 5 million, this is the question, how many of those 5 million enjoy theater and will sit through theater? So that is the question, because virtual reality is such a wide place. And the other trick with VR, which I do believe that, like streaming and filming and all that, theater, VR, that nut will be uncracked, is you have to also think, you have to do 2 versions of it. You have to do a VR version, and you have to do a version that you could stream or put in cinema because of the longevity. And that's where it becomes costly, because ideally it's 2 different types of captures.
Eben, what was your question about Come From Away? I don't have it in context.
I saw Come From Away, filmed. So I was just wondering if there's any insight on that, how that happened, because it looked like it was filmed in an empty theater, but then some of them, the scenes did have audience. So do anyone know about that? Which, by the way, I thought was really great done.
Do we know?
I didn't work on it, but Cody.
I mean, I assume it's just like when we do shows together, you generally film 2 live performances with a real paying audience all the way through, but then often you do pickups. And whether that's a few hours or an entire day schedule, so you can go in and get camera angles that you can't do when you have a paying audience there, because you'd be blocking everyone's views. So I would imagine Come From Away probably filmed over the course of a few days, and one of those days was allowing them to get some of those like over the shoulder shots.
I have a question about that. Does the director of a show set up the camera shots, or do you get a director of photography and specifically to help you with that?
That's a great question, and it's actually something that's evolving. because if you could see like Chris Ashley directed Come From Away and Diana, ideally you have a TV director that comes in that knows how to film for TV and all the angles, and they work with the stage director to make sure they get the most important parts of the show. But ideally you do bring in someone that has the experience of filming captures. That's starting to shift as more and more directors are getting involved in filming their stage productions. So it's changing, but traditionally it's always been, unless you are like a Lonnie Price that films stage and films direct stage and directs TV film, they bring in a TV director or a capture director now because they're streaming.
Cody, in your budgets, does that include a director of photography or?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of need that. There are two different mediums, two different skill sets, unless you happen to have someone who, you know, has a foot in both worlds. But it's a fascinating process, at least for the shows I've worked on. They're more or less called live by the director. And it's interesting to see, you know, the TV director and our stage director in the control booth, you know, as they're kind of calling the show. It's two different skill sets. It really, I think, in an ideal world, you need both. You need someone who knows both of those worlds.
Myra continues is asking again about live virtual form, but I'm not sure that we're the people to answer that question about whether the theatrical production made only in a live virtual form is something that, I mean, obviously we all believe it's going to happen. I'm
a technology nerd. I've done, you know, I've seen live shows wearing an Oculus, and I want that to happen. But then the producer of me thinks, you know, well, if there's only 5 million headsets in America, and let's say even half of them are interested in theater, I can't make money on a show that only has a potential market size of 2.5 million people. So I want someone else to figure it out, and then I'll jump on the bandwagon once it's figured out.
So I'm still looking. Ralph Lewis says that there's something called a vision mixer. I've heard that the person one needs is called a vision mixer. Does anybody know what a vision mixer? It sounds like an editor.
Is that? Yeah.
Sounds like somebody that's blending the vision of the TV, the TV photographer and director of photography and the stage director.
There would probably, yeah, maybe a vision mixer would be an editor. But I'm not sure. I haven't heard the terminology.
Michael Grover asks a very simple question: do any shows get done exclusively for streaming? And the answer is yes. So, does anybody know of any specific examples of shows that were conceived of for streaming?
Sure,
I'm sure you must have them.
We did Closer Than Ever. That was in the UK. That was put up just for streaming. We got the cast together and we did 2-week rehearsal and then we filmed them.
The bigger question is whether or not it's financially feasible, whether you make money off of it or not. Jeremy, what's your take on it?
I mean, I don't have firsthand experience with it as far as the stuff I've been working on has typically been for either for theater, theater productions that were stage productions being developed that way, or work for hire for non-theater events. So I don't really have the specific knowledge of one that was started from scratch as a theater-like production, but designed strictly for live stream. I've talked about it on some of the projects I was working on as a theater producer, but haven't actually jumped in yet.
The answer to all of the questions is everything is possible. I mean, almost anything that you suggest is probably going to happen if it hasn't already. Jeffrey Lyle Siegel wants to know if he can have an unpaid studio audience under the SAG-AFTRA agreement. Can he have an audience that's not paying for the tickets to be part of the experience if you're filming something? Anybody know that?
I don't have an answer, but my gut tells me if these were more extra types and you're getting them through an audience service because you want clapping and you want responses, you'd probably be in the clear. If you're trying to fill 2,000 seats and they're getting a ticket through something like Ticketmaster, even if it's free, that they might try to shoot down. But I'm completely guessing on that.
Will Netflix or say HBO become the disco of streaming for theatrical? Catherine, why don't you ask this question? I'm not sure I understand it reading it.
Oh, I was wondering if, say, any of the distribution companies like Netflix or HBO or whatever do you think they'll ever bully in and try to buy Broadway HD and become the distribution company when this gets really, really, even before it gets really, really big? Or are you praying for that?
Well, I don't own Broadway HD, so
Well, you should, or are you going to buy it today?
but yeah, it's interesting. I think it's kind of evolving.
Okay, well, let us all know because we would like to participate.
I think it's evolving, but I don't know. I just don't.
Yes.
I think that we're very niche. I think we're still at that niche level, so it would have to be a huge benefit for the bigger streamers to have that filming theater leg part of their company.
Right, like when the documentary channels started.
Correct. So hey,
It'll happen.
come about.
Let's go, everyone.
Judy Binus wants to know, Cody, how did Indecent do? So I think the question there really is, was the revenue from the live streaming of Indecent worth the investment that you made? And how in general did it help ticket sales, or do you even know?
No, I mean, it wasn't released until the show was closed on Broadway, so it certainly didn't affect ticket sales. Without giving away anything confidential, it didn't make a lot of money. It didn't lose a lot of money, but I think it added value to the property itself, to the show.
Mm-hmm. I think it helped the West End production that just happened.
Yeah.
So.
Were your original investors in Indecent, were they participating in the live stream version of it as well?
Yeah, so unlike most other shows, the cast album, the live stream, everything for me is part of we call it the mother company, the LLC of the original show. And part of that is because I think they all feed off each other. Part of it is that honestly, it's just easier. The thought of creating another entity and raising money again and hiring another team to do each of these projects is a headache I don't want. So I always put them all together as one.
We have yet more questions about virtual reality. We're not going to take any more of those. Michael Grover wants to know, Gio, what is the shelf life you're seeing for your products? Is there a shelf life? I mean, are you taking things off that just aren't?
Well, things are most of the content on Broadway HD are licenses, so they're either 3 to 5 or 7-year licenses. Obviously, our original are around forever, so we are renewing most of our licenses, so there is shelf life. You have to think, there's always new subscribers coming in, and new subscribers are going to look at content that maybe an old subscriber has already seen a few times.
Ralph is saying that in TV, the what we were talking about before, the vision mixer mixes the show by calling the cameras. But you were actually saying, Gio, that the director also is calling the cameras in the technical booth. And
right, so there's a TV director that comes in, that studies the script, looks at a single camera shot of the film, that practices and calls all the shots. So they'll sit in a booth or in a truck, because we all know there's no room at a Broadway theater. And they sit there and say, camera 1, go, camera 2, go. They also have an assistant director that calls the minor shots. And the stage director is in the booth with them, that usually gives notes in between, but they have a lot of prep time to work on shots.
It would actually be fascinating, Gio, to see, sometimes they show those clips of like the Oscars and them calling it live, to actually have like a GoPro in the truck outside and show a clip of it being called like during the show.
We actually have some clips from some of the shows. It is, I want to say, after sitting through many of these at Broadway HD, is a real fascinating experience to see
Yeah.
a TV director call a show. He is nonstop for 2 hours of the show, and if it's in one act, it's an hour and a half. And he, it's constant. Like it's like a stage. It's like how a stage manager calls the show, triple speed.
Yeah.
Well, it's now 6:40, so I'm gonna end now. But I want to actually thank my attendees, the community, for being incredibly engaged in this conversation, more so than almost any other conversation we've had in the past 2 years. Amazing, guys. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for actively being part of it. I'm going to thank Jeremy Handelman and Gio Messale and Cody Lassen for being with us today. Hopefully it was a useful conversation for people. I know that we don't, I warned you earlier that we may not have the answers. We just have answers, because this is an evolving situation. We're not there yet. I think it's pretty easy to predict that this is going to be very, very much an ongoing part of the Broadway and the commercial theater. Live streaming is going to stay with us. I don't think it's going to drop away anytime soon or anytime at all. So thank you for the thoughts that you brought to the table today, guys, and thank you for your generous sharing of information. And thank you, YouTube viewers who have stumbled upon us. Here we are. We're here every week, 5 o'clock on Fridays. If you want to be in the room and ask the questions and be part of the conversation, you should email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. And we can put you on the list and we can invite you every week. Everybody knows, you know this one already. You've heard this one before. We do this for free. We do this as a service. We also need money. So basically, my plea to everybody is do consider supporting us. You're absolutely welcome to be here for free. We do this as a community service, but we do have bills to pay. So whatever support you can offer us, go to trudonate.com. I'm putting it in the chat. I hope I got it right, trudonate.com. That's just a simple URL that redirects to our very complicated URL, but it'll get you to the donation page so you can help us and you can support us. And next week, who do I have next week? Come next week and join us because we're going to have, well, we're being very hip and very current. We're going to be talking about non-fungible tokens next week. We have somebody who's going to talk about NFT as being another alternate revenue stream for commercial theater. It's a topic I know nothing about, but luckily the guy that's coming to speak about it knows a ton. So join us next week as well. And same to you, YouTube viewers. Thank you very much for being with us. And thank you, everybody in the room. So that's it.